Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to the ninth meeting of the Public Utility Commission for calendar year 2014, and ask that you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first matter on this morning's agenda are the approval of the minutes from the April 3rd meeting, and it's a pleasure to recognize Commissioner Whitmer as the editor of the minutes. Commissioner Whitmer.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to report that no component of our minutes was manufactured by GM and recalled, so therefore we are safe to proceed full throttle and approve the minutes of April 3rd, 2014.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved to go full throttle as submitted here this morning. And I'm pleasure to welcome to the podium to officially kick off the public meeting this morning, Ms. Cheryl Walker-Davis. Good morning, Cheryl.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
May it please the Commission, on behalf of your various offices and bureaus, we present for your consideration and disposition the following agenda items, starting this morning with matters on behalf of the Bureau of Audits. It is recommended that the Commission adopt on page 1 the 3 items appearing there with regard to the release of audit reports for the UGI Utilities Inc. companies.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Continuing to page 2 of the public meeting agenda, on behalf of the Bureau of Consumer Services, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation with regard to National Fuel Gas Distribution Corporation's Universal Service Energy and Conservation Plan.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On behalf of the Office of Competitive Market Oversight, the first 5 items pertain to recommendations of that Bureau with regard to customer account number access mechanisms by the various electric distribution companies. It is recommended that those be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
That takes us to the last item appearing on page 4 with regard to the recommendation with regard to the joint electric distribution company, electric generation supplier bill for developing a more supplier-oriented utility consolidated electric bill. We recommend the adoption of that recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On page 5 of the public meeting agenda, commencing on page 5, with regard to matters on behalf of the Office of Special Assistance, we recommend the adoption of the first item pertaining to the Pennsylvania Electric Company and Metropolitan Edison Company transmission service charge mechanism, noting the statement of Commissioner Whitmer.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her statement. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a conflict statement, and I would like it to be entered into the record as if I'd read it in its entirety.
So noted. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, noting the conflict statement issued this morning by Commissioner Whitmer.
With regard to the proceeding involving Danielle Douglas versus Philadelphia Gas Works, there is the motion of Vice Chairman Coleman.
I'd like to recognize Vice Chairman Coleman this morning for purposes of his motion. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd ask that my motion be entered into the record as though I read it in its entirety. This is a customer complaint case in which the utility overcharged the customer due to a fast gas meter. My motion establishes a process via tentative order for the utility to recalculate the credit owed to the customer in accordance with our regulations. Therefore, I move that the complainant's exceptions be granted in part consistent with this motion, the initial decision be modified consistent with this motion, and the Commission's Office of Special Assistance draft an appropriate tentative order consistent with this motion.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
In omnibus fashion, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the last item on page 5 in the proceeding involving the Law Bureau Prosecutory Staff versus Duquesne Light Company, and continuing with all items appearing on pages 6, 7, 8, and 9 through and including the proceeding involving the interconnection agreement of the Bentleyville Communications Corp., DBA Fairpoint, and Lumos Networks.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Turning now to matters on behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services. In omnibus fashion, we recommend the adoption of all of the recommendations appearing on pages 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, through and including the first item appearing at the top of page 17 and with regard to the application proceeding of the Harrison Global LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, will present the next two items in tandem, those being the application of Leather Stocking Gas Company and the application of UGI Penn Natural Gas Company. We recommend the adoption of those matters on behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services, noting the statement of Commissioner Whitmer with regard to both.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her combined statement. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like my combined statement entered into the record as if I'd read it in its entirety. In essence, I'm applauding both UGI and Leather Stocking for their continued utilization of Marcellus Shale gas. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitmer. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
In omnibus fashion, we recommend the adoption of the tariff proceeding involving Duquesne Light Company appearing at the bottom of page 17, as well as the first item appearing at the top of page 18 pertaining to the application of North Penn Long Distance DBA Empire Access Services.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Cawley for purposes of a statement. And Commissioner Cawley, I believe this is regarding the Duquesne Light Company case.
That is correct, Chairman. I ask that it be entered in the record as if I had read it in its entirety. This compliments Duquesne Light for making an interim filing regarding imbalances that have built up in its revenues and costs related to its Act 129 energy efficiency programs. I compliment the company and encourage others to do the same rather than letting imbalances build up for nearly a year, which has an adverse impact on customers or can. It's better that they do it on an interim basis where the adjustments are much smaller.
Thank you, Commissioner Cawley. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, noting Commissioner Cawley's statement. And again, just for our Secretary's Bureau, this is for the Duquesne Light Company case.
Supplement number 88 to Tariff Electric PUC number 24 appearing at the bottom of page 17. Continuing with the presentation of items on page 18, the first item having been considered, we move to the second item. It is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation in the proceeding involving Yellow Cab Company of Pittsburgh, Inc., TA Yellow X, noting the joint statement of Commissioners Whitmer and Brown.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of the joint statement. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Brown and I would like our joint statement entered into the record as if we'd read it in its entirety. In essence, our joint statement applauds the unique use of technology for Yellow X, and we look forward to continuing to receive these types of applications, bearing in mind that safety of the public is of our most important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitmer. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, noting the joint statements of Commissioners Whitmer and Brown.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt, on behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services, the recommendations commencing with the recommendation in the application proceeding involving Aqua PA in the middle of page 18, continuing with the remaining item on page 18, as well as all items appearing on pages 19, 20, 21, and 22 through and including the recommendations to make the quarterly earnings report public.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Commissioner Cawley.
On the last item on page 22, I wish to respectfully vote no.
So noted. Any further objections? Hearing none, the motion passes 4-1.
Turning now to matters on behalf of the Law Bureau, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the items on page 23, commencing with the recommendation in the proceeding involving the implementations of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and continuing with all items on page 23, page 24, and page 25 through and including the automatic adjustment clause rulemaking.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On page 26, turning to matters on behalf of the Office of Administrative Law Judge, it is recommended that the Commission adopt, at the top, the recommendation of ALJ Dunderdale in the proceeding involving Cooperstown Water Company.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
With regard to the complaint proceeding involving David Kearse and Ronald Walker versus the Philadelphia Gas Works, there's a joint motion of Commissioners Cawley and Brown.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Cawley for purposes, Commissioner Brown, excuse me, for purposes of the joint motion here this morning. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Commissioner Cawley and I ask that our motion be submitted for the record. I will summarize it. Our review of the complaint shows that in addition to asking that the liens be removed, which we agree is outside the Commission's jurisdiction, the complainants allege that PGW improperly established a gas account in the name of a person who is not on the complainant's lease, and the complainant should not be responsible for the unknown person's arrearage. PGW's tariff indicates that applicants for service must be on a lease, deed, or mortgage. Failure of a public utility to show the provisions of an approved tariff falls squarely within the Commission's jurisdiction. Because the Commission retains jurisdiction over compliance with tariff provisions, the portion of the complaint alleging provision of service to a person not on the lease should not have been dismissed on preliminary objections. As such, we will remand this portion of the complaint to the Office of Administrative Law Judge for such hearings as deemed necessary. Therefore, we move that the initial decision be reversed in part consistent with this motion, and that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an opinion and order consistent with this motion.
Second?
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
In the proceeding involving the complaint of Joseph Orek versus PPL Electric Utilities Corporation, there is the motion of Commissioner Brown.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Brown for purposes of our motion. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. I ask that my motion be submitted for the record, but I will summarize it. The complaint raises two distinct issues. The first is that the complainant's challenge to the right-of-way itself and his request that PPL negotiate a new one. The second issue involves the complainant's challenge to removal of an existing thicket and PPL spraying practices. With regard to the first issue, the ALJ correctly ruled that the Commission lacks subject matter jurisdiction over the scope or validity of the right-of-way. However, on the second issue, the ALJ incorrectly ruled that the Commission lacks subject matter jurisdiction over vegetation management practices, including the removal of vegetation and spraying. Legal precedent distinguishes between issues surrounding the grant of a right-of-way scope or validity, which are beyond the Commission's jurisdiction, and an adequacy or reasonableness of the public utility service or actions in that right-of-way pursuant to Sections 102 and 1501 of the Code. It is clear that vegetation management and actions within rights-of-way fall within the Commission's jurisdiction. As such, this portion of the complaint should not have been dismissed on a preliminary objection. Therefore, I move that the initial decision be reversed in part and remanded to the Office of Administrative Law Judge for further proceedings as may be necessary, consistent with this motion, and that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an opinion and order consistent with this motion.
Second?
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Continuing with matters on behalf of the Office of Administrative Law Judge, it should be noted that the first item at the top of page 27 in the proceeding involving Crystal Garber versus Pico Energy Company Electric Division has been postponed until public meeting of June 5th. It is recommended that the Commission adopt ALJ Caldwell's recommended decision approving the settlement in the proceeding involving Citizens Electric Company of Lewisburg and Wellsboro Electric Company.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, that does conclude the presentation of agenda items.
I just have one quick announcement. I'm looking out in the audience this morning, and you saw on the public meeting agenda the formal recognition of the Office of Competitive Market Oversight. And I'd like to take this opportunity with my colleagues to congratulate Kirk House and being officially named to that position. Kirk has spent countless hours preparing this commission for not only today's proceeding at 10 o'clock, but he's been played an instrumental role in our very successful retail market investigation. And Kirk, on behalf of all 5 of us, I just want to congratulate you on this opportunity. With that, we are adjourned. Everybody have a great Memorial Day weekend.